What is going on, guys? We're back with more picks and predictions. This weekend we have UFC Vegas 113 in the Apex. We got a poverty fight night after 2 straight numbered events back to back, and we went extremely nuclear on picks for UFC 325. We went 9 for 10 on predictions. The only one we missed was Dan Hooker, and Dan Hooker was doing pretty well in that fight as a plus 300 underdog. I thought he did really well in the first round, and he could stop the takedown of BSD, but he just had a really bad fight IQ moment, ends up shooting in for his own takedown for some odd reason, ends up on bottom, and we know what happens from there. But, outside of that, went 9 for 10, clean sweep on bets, 4 for 4, up over 7 units on that night. So, doing really well. Let's keep the momentum going into this fight night, and let's jump right into the predictions for UFC Vegas 113. You already know how we do it here. We start with the main event and work our way down to the first fight on the card. That way we talk about the fights you really care about first up. And we have Mario Bautista versus Vinicius Oliveira in a solid fight night main event in this bantamweight division. Both of these guys are really exciting fighters. Mario Bautista coming off a loss to Umar Nurmagomedov. And, he did do decently well in that fight. He did get 30-27, but at one point he did drop Umar. And then prior to that, he was on a good win streak. That Jose Aldo split decision, he lost a little bit of his reputation there, but he is an exciting fighter. And then Vinicius Oliveira, he's just tearing it up. He's undefeated inside the UFC, and this guy's an absolute brawler. He walks forward every second of the fight, and that's something I really, really enjoy about watching Vinicius Oliveira fights. Now, Mario Bautista is 10 times more skilled than Vinicius Oliveira, but Vinicius Oliveira is literally like the best build for MMA right now, which is insane chin, will just keep eating, keep walking forward. And, Mario Bautista, I think, is somebody that could potentially take advantage of that, but Oliveira is always going to have his hands down, walking forward, uses a lot of head movement to get out of the way, throws bombs, loads everything up, telegraphs everything. And, so far his grappling has kind of held up to standard. He can get a good trip on his own. He has some good takedowns of his own. I don't know if Mario Bautista comes out here and just fully out-grapples Vinicius Oliveira. I think so far Oliveira's grappling, like I said, has held up. Now, Mario Bautista is going to be the slicker, cleaner striker. Oliveira is going to be just an absolute machine, walking forward, throwing bombs, doing the same thing he always does. And I actually think that, over 5 rounds, now, for some reason, I thought Mario Bautista is this 5-round fighter, but I think this is his first 5-round fight, if I'm not mistaken. And, Vinicius Oliveira also his first 5-round fight, but I think if you go watch a Vinicius Oliveira fight and then tell me if, you can kind of combat that for 25 minutes, it's going to be insanely hard. Obviously, Oliveira himself will also gas out, but I think that Mario Bautista has a lot on his plate. Moving backwards for 5 rounds is going to be insane. So, with the way Oliveira moves forward and him throwing bombs, I think he has the danger side to him. I think in later rounds, that is going to be insane. So maybe Bautista knocks him up, but I think Oliveira's chin is looking really good so far. Bautista has been knocked out a couple times before, so I think Oliveira has the danger upside, the finishing upside, and I think that later on in this fight, if Bautista is continuously moving backwards, that could get extremely draining for him. So I'm going to go with Vinicius Oliveira here. He is an underdog. He's done really well for us in the past. He's always kind of come through for us. Inside the UFC, he's been an underdog a couple times, and every single time he's looked like he really knows what he's doing. So give me Vinicius Oliveira. I think he's an absolute dog. Let's move on to the next matchup. Moving on to the co-main event, we have Amir Albazi versus Kyoji Horiguchi, and Kyoji Horiguchi is going to be a lot of people's lock of the week at minus 340, and he's going to be mine as well. I think he's worth every single penny of that betting line. He had a really good fight in his last matchup against Tagir Ulanbekov, and he just dominated Tagir in every single facet of mixed martial arts, ends up getting a 3rd round submission there, and just kind of proves who he really is in this division. And I think that, Amir Albazi, his last win almost 3 years ago, which was a split decision to Kai Kara France, which I honestly think he lost. And then he goes into his last fight over a year ago against Brandon Moreno and just looks extremely flat-footed, does absolutely nothing in that matchup. Kyoji Horiguchi should be able to just kind of out-volume, piece up Amir Albazi. I don't think Amir Albazi is going to be able to get the wrestling going against Horiguchi. And I think Horiguchi is going in here to do another, well-rounded performance. I think he can grapple Amir Albazi later on in this fight as well. Maybe not early, but I think in the late 2nd, early 3rd round is going to be all Horiguchi. And, early on the feet, I think Horiguchi just kind of pieces up Albazi, out-volumes him, kicks low, mixes it up, does everything he needs to do. So Kyoji is still on top of his game. He's 35 years old, but looked better than ever in his last matchup. He's worth every single penny of this betting line. I think he's better everywhere. Let's move on to the next matchup. Moving on to the next fight of the card, we have Jailton Almeida versus Rizvan Kuniev. And this line movement has been extremely suspect all week long, and I'm not going to lie to you, that's going into my prediction for this fight. Jailton Almeida opened at a minus 550 favorite. He's crashed into minus 148, so this screams to me like some injury that someone doesn't know about or something along those lines. I do think Jailton Almeida should be the favorite in this matchup, but I'm going to go ahead and pick Rizvan Kuniev, and I'm not going to lie to you, the line movement is definitely playing a factor in my prediction. But I do think that, Jailton Almeida's empty control is something that the judges are really moving away from scoring. And, in this matchup, I think that Kuniev will have better takedown defense than an Alexander Volkov, for example. Now, will Kuniev stop the submissions of Jailton Almeida? I mean, I think that's a world that really exists. Now, on the feet, I think that, Kuniev is probably going to be a little bit better than Jailton Almeida, but it doesn't take a lot to be better than Almeida on the feet. So, this fight is coming into being a toss-up in my head. The line movement has probably thrown this one all the way off. For me, I'm going to completely just stay away from this matchup, but if I have to give you a pick, fuck it, I'm going to pick the underdog. Give me Rizvan Kuniev. Let's move on to the next fight. Moving on to the next matchup, we have Michal Oleksiejczuk versus Marc-Andre Barriault, and the one thing that I can guarantee is that this fight will end in a knockout. Both of these guys are big punchers. Michal is, going to be more accurate. I think he is the better striker out of the two of these guys. Both these guys also have, interesting durability. I think that, Michal, he does have a bunch of holes on the ground, but Marc-Andre Barriault, man, it's just, I think he gets knocked out a little bit too easily. I think Michal is very powerful and very accurate. So I'm going to pick Michal Oleksiejczuk to win this fight by knockout. Either way, this fight does end by knockout in my eyes, but I think that Michal will be too accurate, too quick, and just the better striker and have the slightly better chin. So everything's kind of leaning to Michal's direction in what I think is primarily a striking matchup. So give me Oleksiejczuk to win by knockout. Let's move on to the next fight. Moving on to the next matchup, we have Jean Matsumoto versus Farid Basharat, and this might be a slightly biased of a pick, but I'm going to pick Jean Matsumoto to win here. I think both the Basharat bros are frauds. They're really good fight managers, but they have no real finishing ability, no real danger to them. They're just really good at, managing the rounds, getting it done on the scorecards. And Basharat is a decision merchant here, and I just think that, Jean Matsumoto, he has a little bit more of the X factor, and it's just the fact that he's 26 years old, and I know he's extremely talented, so he's going to look better and better every single fight in there. He should, in my eyes, be 18-0 with the win over Rob Font in the UFC. So I think that split decision loss to Rob Font, I truly think Jean Matsumoto won that fight. He's going to make every single fight close, so I think this is going to be a sweat, especially if you add on to the fact that, Farid Basharat isn't going to really pose any crazy danger. So I think that Jean Matsumoto is going to create some moments here which are going to make a bunch of these rounds close, which is why I think the actual bet on this fight for me is probably going to be a Matsumoto plus 5.5, something along those lines. I probably won't play Matsumoto at, his plus 200 price tag or whatever that is, but I think that, a plus 5.5 on Jean Matsumoto is going to be solid, because if anyone creates moments here, if anyone's dangerous here, if there's any finishing upside, it's all on the Jean side. So, screw Farid Basharat, the decision merchant. I'm going to go with Jean Matsumoto here. Like I said, there might be some bias in this pick. Let's move on to the next matchup. Moving on to the next matchup, we have Dustin Jacoby versus Juilius Walker. This is the main card opener for this fight night, and this is realistically just your classic striker versus grappler matchup. Dustin Jacoby is far more experienced and the far better striker. If this fight stays on the feet long enough, he will knock out Juilius Walker. And if Juilius Walker can get the takedowns and, get good position on Dustin Jacoby, then he can find a submission or he can find some ground and pound. So I think that Dustin Jacoby, realistically, he has the experience. I think he's just better. Juilius Walker hasn't proved to me much in his first two fights. I mean, going to decision against Rafael Cerqueira is just not it. In my opinion, Rafael Cerqueira is probably one of the worst fighters I ever saw enter the UFC. Just got straight pummeled in every single matchup, and Juilius Walker somehow took him all 3 rounds. Does beat him by unanimous decision, but that was insane. And then before that, he goes a split decision with Alonzo Menefield, and that fight, it sounds good, split decision with Alonzo Menefield. Menefield is kind of a guy, but I don't know what the hell that fight was. Both of them were extremely gassed. They couldn't even stand up in the 3rd round. It was just a sloppy-ass fight. So I think that Dustin Jacoby here just knocks out Walker early. If Walker does get some takedowns early, though, he could find a way to finish this fight. But I'm going to pick Dustin Jacoby by knockout. Let's move on to the next matchup. Moving on to the next matchup, we have Alex Morono versus Daniil Donchenko. And I honestly don't know how Alex Morono is a UFC-level fighter. He's a massive underdog here. Donchenko coming to this fight as a minus 550 favorite. He had a pretty solid win in the Ultimate Fighter finale that he just won against Rodrigo Cezinando. And Donchenko's a brawler, man. man. He throws some real haymakers on the feet. Morono, I think Morono might need to get some takedowns of his own in this fight to kind of stay in it, but I just don't see Morono lasting all 3 rounds. Lay and pray. I think Donchenko knocks him out, gets him out of there. I think Morono's just here for a paycheck at this point. So he's on a 3-fight skid. He's probably going to end up on a 4-fight skid after this matchup. I think that Donchenko gets an early knockout. Let's move on to the next matchup. Moving on to the next matchup, we got Nikolay Veretennikov versus Niko Price. And I've been doing this for over a year now, and there's never been a fight that I came across that I absolutely just did not want to break down, and this is one of them. I almost want to just refuse to give a pick on this fight, but I'm going to do it anyways. I'm going to pick Nikolay Veretennikov, but I find it insane that this matchup is even a thing. Both of these guys are extremely ass. If I was you from a betting perspective, please just stay away from this fight, because anyone who tells you anything with conviction on this matchup, unless they have insider information on an injury, then they're just lying to you, because there's no such thing as conviction in either of these fighters. Like I said, they're both ass. They're both 36 years old at the tail end of their careers. Niko Price was pretty good at one point, but not in the big 2026. And one thing I will say, though, is that if Niko Price wants to dog this fight out against Veretennikov, he probably can. But, nobody knows what type of mindset he's coming into this matchup with. So I'm going to go with Veretennikov. I think he's a slightly better striker. And I don't know if Price is going to come in here and just kind of fully wet blanket him at this age. I just think that's not possible. So I'm going to lean towards Nikolay Veretennikov. Very, very unconfident pick in this one. Don't bet this fight. Let's move on to the next matchup. Moving on up the card, we got Bruna Brasil versus Ketlen Souza. And I'm going to go ahead and pick Ketlen Souza to win this one by decision. I think that in women's MMA, I value volume quite a lot. Unless there's a superior grappling difference, which I don't think Bruna Brasil has in this matchup, she's going to struggle to score points against a Ketlen Souza, who's just way more active in the octagon than she is. I think that she's going to give the judges a lot more to score. And like I said, Bruna Brasil is going to need some takedowns to win this fight, which I just don't see her doing. Ketlen Souza has a pretty good get-up game. And also just in her career, we've seen Souza keep up with higher-level mixed martial artists than a Bruna Brasil. Souza has that win over Yasmin Uriegui. She also has a split decision loss to Angela Hill, which is a really good one because Angela Hill is a prime example of just doing a lot in the octagon, optically just being really there for the judges. And I think that Ketlen Souza in this matchup is going to do something very similar. Just give the judges way more to score than Bruna Brasil and just win this one on the scorecard. So we're going to go Souza by decision. Let's move on to the next matchup. Moving on to the next matchup, we got Kong Wang versus Eduarda Moura. And I'm going to go with Kong Wang to win this one. She had a slight hiccup in her career when she lost to Gabriela Fernandez, but she's kind of back on track since then, and she is still a pretty hyped up prospect in this weight class. And I think that Eduarda Moura in this fight, if she gets stuck on the feet, she's absolutely fucked, and I see that exactly happening to her. I think that Kong Wang will be able to defend the takedown here. Moura literally has to relentlessly pull off a Merab-esque performance to beat Kong Wang. I don't think she does it. I think that Kong Wang pieces her up on the feet, maybe even finds a knockout. But, Moura is tough, so I'm going to go with Kong Wang to win this one by decision. Let's move on to the next matchup. And moving on to the last fight we're going to break down for this card, we got Priscila Cachoeira versus Claudia Segula. And I'm going to go with Claudia to get this one done. I think she's overall the more skilled fighter in this matchup. But that being said, I think Priscila Cachoeira is the better brawler in this matchup. And if, Segula can't secure any grappling going here, any takedowns, I think that Priscila Cachoeira could turn this into a big brawl on the feet and win that way. There's definitely a path to victory for Cachoeira here. But I think overall, the more talented, the better fighter is Claudia Segula, so I can't pick against her in this matchup. I think she has better skills. If this fight does hit the mat, she has a bunch of submission equity here. I think if the fight hits the mat, she'll also kind of control it to a decision as well. So I'm going to go Segula to win this one. Still very low-level women's MMA. Wouldn't bet this fight either, but if I had to make a pick, it's going to be Claudia Segula by decision. And that does it for all the picks and predictions for UFC Vegas 113. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you did catch us last week, like I said, we went 9 for 10 on predictions. We were the second best channel for UFC 325. So I'm hoping we can carry a ton of that momentum over to UFC Vegas 113. There's a ton of chalky fights earlier on in the early prelims. Normally in those spots, I think there are good betting opportunities, but for this card, I think there's a lot of fighters that are just extremely low level, fights that you just cannot trust. So majority of my bets, I think, will lie in the middle and top end of this card. But overall, I think it can be a good card. I think the dogs will be barking. We've picked a bunch of dogs, so let's see how they do. If you did like the video, hit a like, share it with a friend, and drop a comment on which picks you're tailing, which ones you're fading. Good luck to everyone on their bets, and I will see you guys next weekend.